All right, welcome back. So this is lecture two related to chapter seven. It's our penultimate lecture for module two. A lot of drama happened between lectures one and lectures two. I actually filmed this entire lecture, but I realized I made some major mistakes and I had a whole cat situation. So I'm a little bit distracted, but I think this is going to be much better because it's take two for me. So awesome. So let's just talk about some stems. There's some really good ones here. And then there's a couple where, again, I'm just like, I don't know. I don't know, but it's fine. They're good to know. The first word we're learning is a verb, katara. And what's funny is that seems weird. Maybe, oh, you know what? I bet this instead of I'm like it's gonna be so much better, and then I realize a mistake. So it's katara. It should be kitara,Cidere. Those are our infinitive forms of the verb meaning to fall. And then kasus is the perfect passive participle form of this verb, meaning having fallen. And so we get from this the stems cad, kid, and kas. So some of these are going to be kind of very obvious, but the words that are really interesting have kid in them. We're going to talk about that. So cadence is a falling. Incident is something that falls upon you. So incident and accident are actually kind of doing the exact same things with minor differences in the prefix. So in English, I think we think of incident as something kind of neutral, like it can be good, it can be bad, but accident, I mean, I guess we say happy accident, right? But both of these are things that kind of just fall upon you, sense of chance to them. Occident is my favorite of these words. So Occident, I think we use today, I know we use today to mean Western. Occident means West. But the reason Occident means West is because it's referring to the falling of the sun into the horizon. So we talked earlier about Orient, which is coming from the verb meaning to rise. So Occident is coming from the verb meaning to fall. And as a result, we have Occident West, Orient East. I always love that. I think that's great. So decadence and decays, these both have a sense of falling away from understood either moral high ground, like decadence definitely implies falling away from a sort of moral standard, and decay has a sense of falling away from kind of wholeness. Decay implies a falling from a purer state, right? So that's how that comes about. And then deciduous, for all of our arborists out there, for our tree people, a deciduous tree is one where the leaves fall in the fall. That that seems weird. No, sorry, a little distracted. But anyhow, deciduous tree loses its leaves. This is in opposition to like a perennial or an evergreen that doesn't lose its leaves. So if you're a tree person or a plant person, that may be of interest to you. Okay, so this is a great verb. It's a very sneaky verb. It's kaitera kaisus. Now, notice it looks very similar to katera kasus. So, if you're a Latin student, this is something we spend a lot of time on because the sense of falling and killing are actually kind of related, and so it's kind of hard to keep these two apart. I don't think we need to worry about it too much, but the point is that the verb leads to the stems kid and kiss, or Sid and Sis, I guess is how we pronounce them in English, maybe Chid and Chiss, something along these lines. And so, in particular, Sid leads to words like homicide and infanticide. So, these sides, suicide, femicide, these are all coming from this word to kill. So, when you kill a person, that's homicide. When you kill an infant, that's infanticide. Suicide is related, sui means self in Latin, is related, it's called a reflexive adjective. So, that's what that comes from. Yeah, so it's buried in there. I don't know that we would have known that going into this class. An incision is a cutting into, something that's incisive. We usually talk about incisive speech, incisive statement. It's like a cutting statement. And also you could say it's cutting to the heart of the issue, like as opposed to just kind of babbling, which is what I do. Some people speak incisively, they just cut right to the heart of the matter. So that's how that's related. All right, so here it is, caput capitis. I can't believe we haven't learned this word yet. It's a great one. And a lot of interesting things come from it. You will notice that I put capital twice. That is because I made a mistake, but I'm going to say that it's deliberate. But the point is that caput capitis means head. The stem is capit, but we get a lot of words just coming from caput. So chef and chief, these are the heads of organizations, right? The head of a tribe, the head of a kitchen or whatever chef. I wish we could talk about whether y'all are watching this show called The Bear. I don't know if that's just a show to make middle-aged people anxious or if young people know as well. But anyhow, chef, head of a kitchen, very stressful job, apparently. Per capita is a Latin phrase, but we use it everywhere today, right? It means per head. So income per capita is income per person. It'd be in opposition to something like per family, per household, this sort of thing. So capital, we use this, obviously we live in a capitalist society. You may be aware. So capital, the idea of money, it's interesting there's not really a clear line between capital as in capitalism and head, except for perhaps the idea that originally someone's most important possession, the thing that they valued the most would have been their capital possession, right? And so if money, I mean, come on, is your capital possession, and hence it becomes capital, something along those lines. But we also have like, capital letters and, the capital city or this sort of thing. So those are all capital with an A. Most of the time we use the word capital, we are using it with an A. The only time you're going to use the word capital with an O is when you are describing a Capitol building. So the US Capitol is the Capitol building in DC, not DC itself. That's capital with an A. Capitol is a building specifically. It's a very weird kind of quirk of English. And now you know that's part of the reason I'm sure you took this class. So precipitous, precipitation. These two words are more closely related. Precipitous and precipitation have an idea of falling from the head, coming from the head. So coming from a height. Precipitation comes from the head, it comes from the height. And precipitous is a fall from a height, or it's a precipitous view. It's a view from a height. It has a sense of that. Precipitate, I think, though, we've come to mean to cause, to affect. It may have something to do with, precipitation being caused by something, but really when we use the word precipitate, like I precipitated a disaster by eating too much chocolate. It doesn't, it's kind of lost the sense of precipitous and precipitation, but it's still the same word. So there you have it. This is the one, this is the word where I'm just like, I mean, it's fine. It's good to know. It's good to know, but it's maybe it's just too easy. So maybe I shouldn't criticize it. So casus is a Latin noun meaning chance. If you were a Latin student, we would spend a lot of time on this word because for the Romans, the concepts of chance was really, really important, especially as they kind of moved away from kind of belief in gods. And they went through this very kind of, I wouldn't say atheistic period, but there was a real obsession with chance, with the role of chance, and almost a worship of chance. And you even see this in Virgil. It's everywhere. It's a really important concept. We get it a little bit in English. It is the word chance. Chance just comes from casus, so the same word, but that's kind of like a circular, if you know one, you know both. But then the phrase casus belli is a really important one, especially perhaps if you're going into like international relations or world history. But so casus belli is kind of the chance event that leads to a war. It's not necessarily the cause of a war, even though that's what it looks like, but it's more just like the chance. So I think the classic casus belli example would be the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, leading ultimately to World War I, right? So that assassination, it wasn't like, oh, he's dead, let's go to war. But that casus, that chance event ultimately precipitated the war. So that's what a casus belli is. There's another phrase called cassis foederis, which is the something that's taken care of in a treaty. So if that's interest to you, you could look that up. So we do see that in some kind of legal context. And then casuistry, this is like it's in the book, which is why we're talking about it. It's a very particular phenomenon. Casuistry technically is just using chance events to kind of inform one another, or using the circumstances of a chance event to inform your understanding of another event. It was used quite a bit by the church and church philosophers in medieval times and later medieval times to justify certain activities that weren't necessarily, you couldn't necessarily look to God or to the Bible, right? So if the question is, should a baker get cheaper flour even if he knows it's going to make disgusting bread because he can't afford the more expensive flour? Like, you don't necessarily look to the Bible for that sort of thing. Maybe you do, maybe some of us do, but not everybody did. And so you look to another chance event, like what does a shoemaker do when he can't afford to buy leather? And so that's kind of how it started. And philosophers would use that kind of process quite a bit. But what ended up happening is people used it to make very kind of specious, morally corrupt arguments justifying, like enslavement of people and the abuse of power. And so it became picked up during the Reformation as a criticism of Catholics, and it became kind of synonymous with trickery. Casuistry became almost like a sin for Reformation Christians. So that's what it is. So that might be interesting for you to know, and that's where it comes from. The idea of, I think, chance events as opposed to perhaps providential events or divine events. That was a long diversion. Yes, you're welcome. Sorry. Okay, so this word cognoscere cognitus, classic, famous word. If you don't know any Latin at all, you probably know the phrase cogito ergo sum, which is related to cognoscere. But so cognoscere means to learn or to understand. It gives us the stem cognos. The perfect passive participle is cognite, and mainly we use cognite, right? So cognition, cognitive. These are both words related to the process of learning and understanding. Of course, now we have cognitive science and this sort of thing. Cognoscenti, these are we would also use the word, I think, well, I don't know. I mean, that would be an interesting thing to discuss. We have another phrase, intelligentsia, which is related to this, but cognoscenti are just like the people in the know. And it doesn't, they don't have to know something brilliant. It could just be like the cognoscenti of, you know, manga. Sorry, this is a topic I know nothing about, and I try to learn because my nephew is in love with it, but I know nothing. So, like, my nephew and his friends would be manga cognoscenti, and I would be like the rabble. You could use it in that way, just a group of people who understand something. And when you're incognito, you are unrecognizable. You are unable to be learned. You are unable to be understood, right? So in is this negative, and that's what happens when you're going incognito, basically in disguise. Now I'm trying to think the word disguise. I mean, that's definitely from the French. Yeah, I don't think that has a. I don't worry about disguise. It's not gonna be in this chapter anyway. All right, so this verb, I could have sworn we talked about this verb. Like it just feels like we've done it before, but it could just be that I talk about this verb all the time. It's one of my favorite Latin verbs. It's a very tricky one though. And you'll notice, so dare is the infinitive, to give. Datus is the perfect passive participle, becomes ditus with a prefix attached. This word, if you take off the ARE ending, which is you're supposed to do, you get the stem D. So please don't think that every time you see the letter D, you are dealing with a form of dare. This is just absolutely of no value. I would just ignore this stem altogether because it doesn't make any sense. But the stems dot and deet do come up quite a bit. And they're subtle, right? So a tradition is something that's handed across. It's trans plus deet, so it's handed across generations. That's what a tradition is. Now, treason and traitor, the book talks about this. It goes at length. Treason and traitor come from that same trado idea, but they come through French, obviously, and it's related to an old Latin phrase. So in Latin, a traditor would be a person who handed something off and crossed a boundary in doing so. So you can imagine someone like Catiline, who is this famous Roman traitor, who handed power across lines that were necessary. He handed information. He broke laws by handing information across things. And so traditor becomes traitor, and traitor is associated with treason. When you commit treason, you are a traitor. And treason, of course, you're handing like secrets across a national boundary. So that's what the tra is doing. So I mean, it's interesting. They're all kind of related. Extradition is when you brought out of a place, extradited to another country. So it's extra as opposed to just ex and tra. Perdition, our book talks about, it's really interesting, especially if you're studying religion or interested in religion. Perdition is kind of, I think now it has a sense of doom, right? And there was a Tom Hanks movie from a very long time ago called Road to Perdition. But perdition was kind of picked up by Christian thinkers and associated with hell. essentially. So the book discusses that. And yeah, and so render is actually just the verb form of rendition. Rendition is the returning, the giving back. And we use rendition in a lot of different ways, including like this is my rendition of T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, right? Like version. We often use rendition like version, but technically it's the giving back. And then when you render something, you're giving it back. Editor is related to addition. Addition is a giving from, so it's a version of something else. And so when you're editing something, you're creating a new edition of it. And then addition is adding. I have a PhD. Addition is adding, and that's all I'm going to say. Addition is giving to. Right. So we're going to do some more math later. This is actually maybe too heavy of a math lecture for me. So my brain is just exploding. Okay, so fluora, we actually talked about this a little, actually, the word fluorescent. So fluora fluxus means to flow. It leads us to the stem flu and flux. So influence is pretty chill, confluence, effluence, these are all processes of flowing, flowing in, flowing together, flowing out. So that's pretty straightforward. Influx is, I think it's still there. It was a very hip coffee shop down in Little Italy for a while, but influx is just the kind of noun version of that, right? An influx of coffee into my system. But so fluorescent is coming from this, is coming from flowing. Now, I don't think this is right. But I just, because when you turn on a fluorescent light, the light kind of flows in as opposed to just flashing. So that's how I remember it, if that's of interest to you. But if you're a color theorist, that might be something to look into. And then influenza is this technical term related to this verb of flowing. So there you have it. And so fundera fusus, similar but different, means to pour. So fund and fus, so an infusion is a pouring in. Effusive is a pouring out. Yeah. The word fund is not technically, I was looking into this. The word fund is coming from a different Latin word that means, different Latin word is fundus, which means foundation. I would not be completely surprised to find out that that Latin word fundus actually is related to the word pour, but the word fund per se is not really coming from this. So don't worry about that if that was something you were. But fusion, things pouring together. So yeah. Okay. So this is another word where I'm like, is this a valuable use of our time? But maybe, I mean, if we had but world enough and time, we could talk a lot about the noun hospice, which is a third declension noun, and so hospitus is its genitive form. Hospice, and the book talks about this actually, so you don't need to rely on me, but this meant both guest and host. Now, of course, in modern day society, our capitalist society, guest and host are two radically different things, right? They have very different responsibilities. But for the ancient Greeks, for the ancient Romans, there was a much more kind of flexible, almost communal sense of guest and host. By being a host, you were ensuring that someday you would be a guest, and that person who is a guest now is a host later. So they kind of really worked together and had the same sense. And so we see this here, hospit, in our stem with the words like hospital, hospitable, hospice, hostel, hotel. These are all kind of words indicating a relationship of caregiving and accepting. But it's not just like you're coming home, right? There's a sense of exchange. And so for some words like hospital and hospice in particular, there's much more of a sense of caregiving. Hostel and hotel are obviously much more. Much more kind of an exchange of services. And the word hostile, Hostile, is not related to this. Hostile is different. So, yeah, okay. So, this is another word that, of course, I love because it indicates that I am a master, which who wouldn't? Who wouldn't want to take that on? So the book gives us the example magister, magistry for teacher. There's also a feminine version of this now, magistra, magistri. Not that that really matters for this class, but just so you know, this is a noun that has many genders so, too associated with it. So originally meant teacher is kind of a humble profession for both the Greeks and Romans, but it just took on a lot of powerful resonances as it came through English. So a magistrate, this would have been a sort of political office or a social office, a position of power. Master, then, as we know, comes to us, and then Mister is surely just some sort of derivation of master. So all of these are coming from the original word teacher, which just goes to show teachers are the best. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to learn two words here, minor, minus, which is an adjective, and menura, minutis, which is a verb. These are doing the exact same thing. They just produce slightly different stems. So obviously we get the word minor from this, a minority from this. So minors and minorities, these are just smaller things, right? Minority is a group of smaller, this group of small people. Minority is just the smaller group as opposed to majority, which is related to the word major, which is surprising we're not learning. Yeah, anyhow. And yeah, so you get it, you see it. But what I like is the word minuscule, which is a diminutive of the word less. So minuscule is like super small, which makes sense because that's what minuscule is, super, super small. And I realized when I did this lecture the first time that this must be where the word mini is coming from, as discussed in the first part of this lecture. So there you go. And then there's the verb form of it, manura. It just gives us a couple of different stems, minute and minute. So diminution is the making smaller of something, minutiae, very small things. Now minuend, let me tell you, this is the reason I'm doing the lecture over, because I made a huge mistake the first time. So let's say you're doing some math. Let's say you're subtracting 10 from 20. So when you write it down, you have 20 minus 10 equals whatever. I'm not a math person. So the minuend is coming from a gerund. If you remember it's a gerundive, I guess. Remember our last lecture. So minuend literally means thing needing to be lessened. So as I was saying this, I realized that the minuend has to be the bigger number. It has to be 20 in our example. 20 is the number needing to be lessened. And then the 10, the second number, 20 minus 10, the 10 is what's called a subtrahend. So a subtrahend is another gerund from traho, which we learned, if not the last lecture, then two lectures ago. And subtrahend means must be dragged under. So minuend is the bigger number, subtrahend is the number being subtracted. Does this help? Please let me know. I am not sure. But I think it's nice to know these things. And I would be really curious to know if math people, if you use the terms minuend and subtrahend. I stopped taking math in 1997. My last math class was a philosophy course. So I am not familiar with this terminology, but I would love to know. So please reach out if that's the case. Okay. Oh, whoa, that's it. That's the end of lecture two. So we have just a little bit left after this in lecture three. So I hope you will come back and I will see you then.